I noticed her on the 364th night. That is the part I cannot explain to my council, to my court, or to myself. She had poured wine at my table for a full year, every evening without exception, crossing from the side passage to my right hand and back again with a stillness that made no sound. I had looked through her the way I looked through the carved obsidian pillars holding up the roof of my great hall. She was furniture. She was the shape a maid makes when she does her work well and vanishes. And then, on the 364th night, I looked at her and could not look away. I cannot tell you why that night and not the night before. I can tell you what I was doing when it happened. My first counselor, Renwick, had his hands flat on the war table and was explaining to me, in the patient voice he uses when he believes I am being unreasonable, that I would hold a fifth mate selection right before the moon quarter turned. I had refused 4. My wolf had turned away from every woman presented, not with aggression, not with the low snarl that means threat, but with the absolute cold stillness that means nothing, as though they were not there. As though the thing they were asking my wolf to feel about them was a language my wolf had never been taught. The northern packs are watching, Renwick said. The council has given you 4 rites, a 5th will be held. I said, my wolf is not a ceremony. He said, your wolf is the future of Thavorn. I had no answer to that. He was right, which is the thing I disliked most about him. I picked up my wine glass, and she was there, crossing the back of the hall with the evening's second carafe, moving in that particular unhurried way she had, the kind of quiet that is not performance but simply the absence of anxiety. She wore the gray uniform of the palace staff. She had a loose braid the color of river bark and ink-stained fingers from some work I had never asked about. And her eyes, the one time I had ever seen them directed at me in any way, were the gray of river stone, entirely steady, entirely without hunger for my notice. I watched her walk back through the side passage and disappear. Renwick was still talking. I had missed 3 sentences. The 5th rite, I said it. He blinked. In 9 years of service, I had not once agreed that quickly. My king. Tomorrow evening, I said, before the moon quarter, you wanted it, said it. He gathered his documents and left before I could change my mind. I sat alone in the great hall with my wine glass and the candles burning low in their iron brackets, and I thought about the fact that I had just agreed to parade 20 noble women past my wolf again, 20 women who had dressed and prepared and hoped. And I had done it because a maid had crossed the back of my hall, and I had not wanted to think about why I could suddenly not stop watching her walk. My wolf was quiet. That in itself was nothing new. My wolf had been quiet for 4 rites in 9 years, and the whole long enterprise of ruling Thavorn without a Luna. But there was a quality to the quiet now that I could not name, not the cold stillness of indifference, something more like listening. I went to bed. I did not sleep well. Her name was Saren. I learned that in the morning, which was itself an indictment. A year of wine poured at my right hand, and I had not asked her name. I told myself this was not cruelty but protocol. The maid staff rotated. Names were in the household ledger. There was a housekeeper whose function was to know these things. But the truth is simply that I had never needed to know. She was quiet. She was competent. She was invisible in the way that good service is always invisible, and I had let her be. I asked my head of household, a woman named Dova, who told me without any particular ceremony, Saren. She's been on the evening wine service since last autumn, came to us from the eastern villages, human family, good worker, no trouble. She paused, the way Dova paused when there was something else. Though the night wolves have been following her. I looked up from the ledger page. The night wolves, I said. The ones that roam the outer courtyard after dark. Dova kept her voice level. They've been sitting outside the staff passage door most evenings. The other girls think it's an omen. I think it's because she leaves water out for them. I thought about that. Does she know what she is? Dova frowned. She's a maid, my king. Yes, I said. Does she know what she is? I think, Dova said carefully, that she believes herself to be an ordinary young woman from a human village who is very fond of wolves. I closed the ledger. Make sure she is assigned to the Great Hall this evening. Dova said nothing further. She was wise that way. The fifth maid selection rite was held at the second evening bell. 20 women. Renwick had outdone himself, daughters of the Northern Pack Lords, cousins of the Highland House, 2 women sent from the river territories whose families had been petitioning for an alliance for 3 years. They were beautiful, most of them, in the way that preparation and anticipation and careful dressing makes a person beautiful. They stood in the great hall beneath the obsidian pillars, with the candles throwing long amber light across the stone floor, and my wolf sat in my chest like a cold stone. I walked the line. This is the rite I walk, my wolf registers, and we see. 9 paces in and my wolf had already told me what I already knew. Nothing. Not cruelty, not rejection, not disgust, simply the absence of the thing that is supposed to be there. The way a room without a fire in winter is not angry at you, it is simply cold. I kept my face even. I had practice at that. At the end of the line, I turned and faced my first counselor across the length of the hall, and his expression was the expression of a man watching something he has prepared for 6 months go precisely as he feared it would go. And then the side passage door opened. She came in with the evening's wine service, the second carafe, the one brought out when the formal rite had concluded and the hall relaxed into something like a gathering. She had not been told the rite was still in progress. I saw her register it in a half-second of stillness at the door. The ranked women, the formal candle arrangement, my position at the head of the hall. Her eyes found the floor. She began to retreat. My wolf stood up. That is the only way I can describe it. Not stirred, not shifted, not the low alert of a wolf catching a threat. My wolf stood up from wherever it had been sleeping for 9 years, from the cold place where it had settled in the absence of what it was supposed to want, and it turned with its whole body toward the woman retreating through the side door with a wine carafe in her hands. I had taken 4 steps across the hall before I knew I was moving. She stopped because she heard my boots on the stone. She turned back, a question in her gray eyes that was not hope or calculation, just the mild, earnest concern of a woman who worried she had done something wrong. The wine carafe was still in both her hands, held out slightly, as though she might still be permitted to finish her work if someone would simply clarify the situation. "Stay," I said. It came out quietly. I had not meant it as a command. Or rather, I had meant it as a command, but I had also meant it as something more than that. Something my wolf was pushing up through my chest and into my voice that had no adequate word in the formal language of Thavorn. She stayed. And then the mate mark opened on her wrist. She saw it before I did. I watched her eyes drop to her own arm, to the inside of her left wrist, and I watched her expression do something I had never seen a face do so cleanly. It moved from confusion to pain to something past pain, into a kind of wide, arrested stillness that was almost like recognition, except that she had nothing to recognize it with. She did not know what the mark was. She had never been told what she was. She had lived 22 years believing herself the human daughter of human foster parents in a human village, and she was standing in a king's great hall at the tail end of a mate selection, right watching a symbol she had never seen burn itself into the inside of her wrist in silver-gold light. The wine carafe hit the floor. It did not shatter, the castle staff used pewter for that reason, and the sound it made was a hollow ringing that carried to every corner of the hall and then stopped. In the silence that followed, Saren looked at her wrist and then looked at me, and I saw in her eyes something I was wholly unprepared for. She was not frightened of the mark. She was frightened of the hall, of the 20 women watching, of Renwick's face, of the formal candles and the obsidian pillars and the sheer weight of what was clearly about to happen, and she did not know enough of what she was to understand any of it. I crossed the rest of the distance to her. My wolf was not walking through the great hall of Thavorn. My wolf was running through its own country, through territory it had been waiting to reach for 9 years, and I could feel every step of it. A warmth I had forgotten existed, a certainty that had no floor beneath it, only the deep, unverifiable conviction that this was the place I was supposed to be standing, and this was the woman I was supposed to be standing in front of. I stopped 2 feet from her. She had her wrist cradled against her chest now, fingers wrapped around it, and she was breathing carefully through her nose the way people breathe when they are trying not to show that they are frightened. "Saren," I said. Something moved in her face when I said her name. She had not known I knew it. "I am going to ask you to stand still," I said, "because what happens next is going to be very loud and very public, and I would prefer to explain it to you, but I cannot explain it while it is still happening. Can you stand still?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she uncurled her fingers from her wrist and showed me the mark, still burning, silver gold, a shape that was both moon and wolf running together, the mark of the Thavorn Luna bloodline, a mark that had not been seen in this hall in 31 years. "I have been standing still for a year," she said, "while everyone around me moved. I believe I can manage a little longer." I had not expected that. The quiet ones never say what you expect. "Good," I said. My wolf bowed. "Not to me, I want to be precise about this, because in all the accounts that were written afterward, some recorders made that error. My wolf did not bow to me. My wolf lowered its great head in my chest, dropped the whole weight of 9 years of waiting into a bow that I felt from the crown of my head to the floor of my feet, and it directed that bow at the woman standing in front of me with ink-stained fingers and a silver mark burning on her wrist. The 20 women in the right line had not moved. 20 noble daughters, every one of them prepared and hoping, every one of them dressed for this evening, and not one of them moved because the hall itself had gone so still that movement felt impossible. Renwick had his documents in his hands and he had stopped breathing. The candles burned. The pewter carafe lay on its side on the stone floor. The wine spread in a slow, dark puddle toward the nearest pillar, and no one looked at it. I looked at Saren. She was looking at me, and her gray eyes had the quality I would come to know best in her, the quality of a person who sees things clearly and says them plainly, without theater and without apology. She was frightened. She was also completely present. She was not going to faint. She was not going to flee. She was not going to pretend the mark on her wrist was not there. She was going to stand in this hall and see what there was to see, because that was who she was, because she had been that person for her entire life without knowing it had anything to do with bloodlines. "My recorder," I said, without looking away from her. Haveth, the ancient court recorder, who had served my father and my father's father and who smelled of old paper and iron gall ink, shuffled forward from his position behind the counselor's bench. He was very old. He had seen many things. He looked at Saren's wrist without touching it, and he looked at it for a long time, and the hall waited. "The Varath Luna bloodline," Haveth said, in the voice of a man reading from a document he memorized 40 years ago. "Mark of the moon and the running wolf, last recorded on the wrist of the Lady Alara of Varath 31 years ago, daughter of the Luna Compact of the Third Age, heritable only through the female line." "Alara of Varath," I said. "Who was she?" "Sister to the Lord Varath," Haveth said. "Her family was scattered the night of the Cauldress border conflict. She was said to have died. Her daughter was not found." He paused. He looked at Saren again. "The daughter would be 22 years of age." Saren had gone very still. I watched her process this, watched the thoughts move across her face in the unhurried way of someone who has lived her life without anyone rushing her, because no one had ever thought her important enough to rush. She was doing sums. She was thinking about her foster parents in the Eastern Village, about the people she had called her family for 22 years, about the fact that she had always known, in the way that you know things you have no evidence for, that she was not quite what she appeared to be. Not in an inflated way. Not in the way of a person who wants to be special. In the careful, honest way of a woman who had noticed that wolves followed her, and that she was never cold in winter, and that she could hear things other people could not hear, and had simply filed all of this away as peculiarity and moved on with her work. "I am 22, she said. "I was found on the road outside Verholt by a farming couple. I was an infant. They raised me. I believed them to be my parents." She paused. "They are my parents. That does not stop being true because of this." "No," I said, "it does not." She looked at me. "What is the mark?" "It is the mark of the Luna bloodline of Thavorn. It appears on the wrist of the fated mate of the Alpha King when the bond recognizes her. It has not appeared in this hall in 31 years. She looked at her wrist, she looked at me. "And you are the Alpha King." "I am." "And your wolf chose me." "My wolf," I said, "has been choosing you for a year. I was the last to understand it." The hall had been holding its breath for several minutes. It could not hold it forever. The first sound came from the right line, a soft, involuntary exhale from somewhere near the center, and then the sound of 20 women remembering they were still in the room. I did not look at them. I was aware of them the way I was aware of the walls, present, relevant to the architecture of the situation, but not where my attention was. My attention was on Saren, who had turned her marked wrist over and was looking at the silver-gold light with the expression of someone examining a piece of work and deciding whether it was made correctly. "Does it hurt?" I asked. "It did," she said. "It doesn't now. It feels," she paused, searching, "warm like putting your hand near a hearth." She looked up. "That seems symbolic." "It is." "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," she said. "I don't know the customs. I've been serving wine at your table for a year, and I don't know the customs." "Neither did I," said, "until approximately 4 minutes ago." Something happened in her face that was not quite a smile, the precursor to one, the decision being made about whether a smile was appropriate, and then the decision that it was not yet but might be soon. "You've known for 4 minutes." 364 days of not knowing, I said, and then 4 minutes of knowing very suddenly. "That is," she said after a moment, "a very specific number." "I noticed you last night," I said. "I counted." She was quiet for a moment. The mark on her wrist had settled, still visible, silver against her skin, but no longer burning. The warmth of it was something I could feel from 2 feet away, a particular quality of the air between us that my wolf was mapping with patient, contented attention, learning it the way a wolf learns the territory it has claimed, carefully, permanently, without any intention of being anywhere else. "My king," Renwick's voice came from behind me, precisely controlled. "The rite." I turned. 20 women, the candles still burning, the formal arrangement of the hall still intact, the obsidian pillars still holding the ceiling, the moon panels in the clerestory windows still letting in the gray light of the early evening. Everything exactly as it had been when the rite began, except that my wolf had come home. "The rite is concluded," I said. Renwick looked at the pewter carafe on the floor and the wine spreading toward the pillar. He looked at Haveth, who was still standing with his ancient, careful face directed at Saren in the manner of a man watching history arrange itself. He looked at the 20 women who had prepared for this evening, and were now bearing witness to something none of them had prepared for. "My king," he said again, and this time it was a different sentence, not a protest but the beginning of the necessary formalities. He was a practical man. He had been my first counselor for 9 years precisely because he understood that reality did not pause for his preferences. "Do you claim the bond?" "I claim the bond," I said. "And the lady Saren," he stopped. He looked at her. He had never said her name before. She had poured wine at the king's table for a year, and he had never said her name. I watched him understand that. It was brief, and it did not show on his face, and he moved past it with the efficiency of a man who would address his own failings in private. "The lady Saren, do you acknowledge the mark?" Saren looked at her wrist. She looked at the hall. She looked at me. "I don't know enough yet to answer that correctly," she said. "I know the mark is there. I know your wolf chose it to appear. I know that I have been in this hall for a year and no one has found reason to speak to me, and now everyone is watching me. I know that the man standing in front of me counted 364 days. She paused. "I would like to know more before I make a formal statement, if that is permitted." Renwick opened his mouth. I raised one hand. "It is permitted," I said. He closed his mouth. "Then I will say this much," Saren said. "The mark is real. It is on my wrist. I did not put it there and I did not ask for it, and I am told it appears by the will of a bond I did not know I carried. I cannot acknowledge what I was not taught to know, but I am not unwilling." She looked at me steadily. "I am not unwilling." 3 words. My wolf heard them like a door opening in a house that had been cold for 9 years. The right line dispersed. It took time. There was the formal release to be given, the protocols to be followed, and Renwick was meticulous about protocols even under unusual circumstances, perhaps especially under unusual circumstances. I stood where I was while the great hall reorganized itself around this new fact, and Saren stood 2 feet from me and watched it happen with her characteristic unhurried attention, her marked wrist at her side. The noble daughters left with their attendants. Most of them went without looking at her. 2 of them looked. One of those 2 had the grace to look with something like wonder rather than resentment. The other's face was smooth and careful, and I did not attempt to read it further. Haveth returned to his position with his documents. The hall staff came in and retrieved the carafe, and mopped the wine, and lit the late evening candles, moving around us with the trained invisibility of people who have learned that certain moments are not theirs to witness directly. Dova appeared at Saren's elbow. She had brought a clean cloth and a small clay bowl of water, and she took Saren's wrist with the brisk tenderness of a woman who had managed a household staff for 20 years and had learned that practicality and kindness were not opposites. She examined the mark. "Well," Dova said, "I should have mentioned the wolves sooner." Saren looked at her. "You knew." "I suspected," Dova said, in the particular tone of a person who had suspected considerably more than they had said, and was not going to apologize for that now. "I thought it was for Thavorn's physicians to say if it was anything. I didn't want to put ideas in your head." "Ideas," Saren repeated. "Ideas about who you might be." Dova patted her wrist with the cloth gently. "You had settled into your work very nicely. I didn't want to unsettle you." "I've been serving wine for a year," Saren said, "to the man my bloodline was apparently destined for." "Yes," Dova said, "you did it very well." There was a silence, and then the decision was made and the smile came. Not a large smile, not a performed smile, but a small and genuine one. The smile of a person who has been ambushed by something absurd and has chosen to find it absurd rather than catastrophic. "Thank you," Saren said. Dova patted her hand once more and stepped back. I had been watching all of this from 2 feet away. My wolf, which had been running and contented, had settled into a warmth that I had no prior experience with, a deep, patient warmth, like the kind of heat that lives in stone walls that have been sun-warmed all day. Not urgent, not demanding, simply present and entirely certain and very pleased with itself. "Saren," I said. She looked at me. "Will you walk with me?" I said. "I would like to tell you what I know and learn what you know and see if the total of it helps." She looked around the great hall at the retreating staff, the extinguished formal candles, the obsidian pillars going amber in the late evening light. She looked at her wrist. She looked at me. "Where do you walk?" she said. "The inner courtyard," I said. "There is a moon garden there. The night wolves use it in the evenings." Something changed in her expression, a softening, a small and private warmth. "I know the moon garden," she said. "I have been leaving water bowls there for the night wolves since last winter." "I know," I said. I was told this morning. And you didn't dismiss me. I was given the information, I said, with the clear implication that I should regard it as significant. I was not yet certain how to regard it. I am more certain now. She studied me. You are a very precise man. I am told so frequently. Do you find it useful? I find it accurate, I said. Whether it has been useful is a longer question. She considered this for a moment. The careful, unhurried consideration I had watched her give to everything, from the angle of a wine pour to, apparently, the man her bloodline had chosen for her. Then she moved toward the door to the inner courtyard, and I walked beside her, and my wolf walked with us in the warmth of its own contentment. And for the first time in 9 years, Thavorn's great hall felt like a place I had actually left behind rather than one I was still trapped in. The moon garden was her country in a way. The great hall had never been mine. I understood that within the first minutes. She moved through it differently, not the careful, practiced stillness of a maid avoiding notice, but the ease of a person in a place that had agreed with them for a long time. She knew where the uneven stones were. She knew which of the old climbing vines had a loose anchor and which held firm. She went directly to the carved basin near the eastern wall and checked its water level with a glance. And a wolf, one of the gray night wolves that ranged the outer courtyard, padded from beneath the hedge and sat at her feet without being called. It ignored me entirely. He does that, Saren said without apology. He is not being rude. He simply has priorities. I have been king of Thavorn for 9 years, I said, and that wolf has never looked at me. He looks at people who bring water, she said. He is practical. I sat on the garden bench. The one I had known was there but had not sat on since my coronation, when someone had made me stand in this garden for a formal portrait, and I had not come back. Saren sat beside me, not close, but not with deliberate distance either, the natural space of two people who do not yet know each other's habits. The marked wolf slept against her feet. 2 more came from the shadows and arranged themselves in the grass nearby. Tell me, she said, what the mark means for someone in my position, not the formal version, the real one. I looked at my hands. I had been asked many things in 9 years of ruling, and most of them I had known how to answer, and some of them I had not. This was the latter kind. The bond chooses, I said. It has chosen before in the history of Thavorn, and it has always been what it said it was. It does not lie and it does not make errors. The wolf and the bloodline recognize what they recognize, and no council and no rite and no amount of ceremony can alter that. I paused. What it means for you practically is that you have a choice. The mark is real. The bond is real. But I am not going to put a crown on your head tonight and expect you to be grateful for it. That is not how I want this. She was quiet for a moment. A moth came and circled the nearest lantern. The wolf at her feet shifted and sighed in sleep. How do you want it? She said. It was a direct question. She asked direct questions the way she did everything else, without performance, without apology, simply because she wanted the answer and could see no reason to approach it sideways. I want you to know what you are choosing, I said. I want you to have the time to know it. I know that is not the custom. The custom is the bond is claimed at the rite, and the formalities follow immediately. But you have been in this hall for a year without knowing what you were, and asking you to make a permanent formal claim within an hour of learning, it seems to me like the wrong kind of precision. She looked at me for a long time. The council will say you are being impractical. The council says that at least once a week, I said. I have managed. What would you have me do? She said. Between now and whenever you consider it sufficient time. Stay, I said, not as a maid, as yourself, in whatever way yourself turns out to be, which I suspect is going to take both of us some time to understand clearly. I paused. And tell me things. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you notice. You have been in this hall for a year and you have seen it from a position I have never had and cannot have, and I find that I am curious what it looks like from that angle. She was very still for a moment. You are curious about what I noticed. I spent 9 years trusting order and procedure, I said. My wolf apparently spent that same time knowing something I did not. I have some interest in learning what it knew that I didn't. Something shifted in her gray eyes. The sixth pillar from the entrance on the left side is cracked at the base, she said. It has been for at least 8 months. The head of maintenance knows about it. He has submitted 3 requests for the repair and none of them have been actioned. The crack is currently 4 fingers wide and gaining. I stared at her. The cook's assistant has been taking meal portions from the senior staff kitchen and selling them to the second courtyard guards for supplemental income. This has been happening for approximately 4 months. It is not enough to cause a shortage, but it will become one by winter. She paused. The night wolves have been gathering in larger numbers near the east wall for the past 3 weeks. I don't know why. It seemed worth mentioning. I said after a moment, "How long have you been cataloging these things?" "I've been pouring wine for a year," she said simply. "People don't notice you when you're holding a carafe. They talk. They argue. They conduct small business transactions they would prefer not to conduct openly. I paid attention because it seemed irresponsible not to." My wolf was beside itself. I was beside myself in a different way. The way of a man who has been running a kingdom for 9 years and has just been handed an intelligence report by the woman he had been looking through for a year, delivered in a garden by lantern light while 3 wolves slept at her feet. "The crack in the 6th pillar," I said. "I will see to it tomorrow." "Thank you," she said. And then, as though it was a perfectly natural continuation, "The north gate on the 3rd courtyard wall also needs its hinges replaced. I didn't mention that one because it's a smaller matter, but since we're making a list." I said nothing for a moment. "Saren," I said. "Yes." "What were you before the eastern village?" She was quiet. "I don't know," she said. "I know what I was told. I know what I felt. I know that I always understood things about this palace that I had no direct reason to understand, and I attributed it to being observant, which I am, but perhaps it was something else as well." "Perhaps," I said. She looked at the mark on her wrist. "Will you tell me about her, the Lady Alara, the one the recorder named?" "I will," I said. "Tomorrow, when Haveth has pulled the historical documents. Tonight I can only tell you what I know from the histories, which is that she was a woman of the Verath Compact who was known for 2 things, her clarity of judgment and the fact that the wolves followed her everywhere." Saren looked at the 3 wolves sleeping in the grass around us. "Well," she said. "Yes," I said. We sat in the moon garden for a long time after that. The wolves slept. The lanterns burned. Somewhere in the great hall behind us, Renwick was almost certainly writing 7 different documents about the evening's events, and the 20 noble daughters were almost certainly traveling back to their respective households with 7 different versions of what they had witnessed. And the court of Thavorn was almost certainly already beginning to process the fact that its Luna had been serving wine at the king's table for a year, while everyone looked through her. I was sitting in a garden, listening to a woman I had not known how to see tell me what she had seen. My wolf had never been so quiet, in the particular way that is the opposite of absence, the quiet of something that has arrived. The formal recognition was held 3 days later. I had asked for 3 days over Renwick's detailed objections. He had many objections. I had given them the weight they deserved and then overruled all of them, because in 9 years of asking my wolf what it wanted and receiving no answer, it seemed unwise to rush the first clear answer it had ever given me. Saren had spent those 3 days in the South Suite guest quarters, the good ones, not because I was making a statement, but because she had been sleeping in a maid's dormitory for a year, and the guest suite had a window that faced the inner courtyard and the moon garden, and that seemed right. Haveth had come to her with the historical documents, and she had read them all, carefully and without rushing, and had asked him questions that made the old man blink and then answer with visible pleasure. On the second day, she had asked to see the sixth pillar from the entrance on the left side, and I had taken her to look at it, and we had both stood in the hall looking at the crack while she explained to me the structural concern with the specificity of someone who had looked at it for 8 months and thought carefully about what she was looking at. The head of maintenance had been summoned and was extremely surprised to find himself discussing load-bearing stone with the Alpha King and the woman he had last seen carrying a wine carafe, and equally surprised to find the conversation was the most technically substantive one he had had with anyone at the palace in recent memory. On the third day, Saren came to find me before the morning bell and said, simply, that she was ready. She wore the blue and silver of the Varath Compact. Haveth had found the colors in the records and Dova had arranged the dress in approximately 12 hours, which was the fastest Dova had ever managed anything, and which told me a great deal about how Dova felt about the situation. Saren did not look uncomfortable in it. She looked, in fact, precisely like herself, unhurried, present, and slightly ink-stained on the third finger of her right hand, because she had been making notes on the historical documents until late in the evening. "You have ink on your hand," I said. "I know," she said. "I chose to leave it. It seemed more honest than the alternative." The formal recognition was held in the Great Hall before the full council and the attending pack lords who had been summoned. The obsidian pillars were candlelit in the full formal arrangement. Haveth stood with his documents. I stood where I had stood 3 days ago. Saren walked into the hall from the side passage, the same door she had come through with the wine carafe 3 days ago, because Renwick had correctly understood that this was the door she knew, and had arranged the formal entrance accordingly, which was possibly the most sensitive thing Renwick had done in 9 years of service, and I made a note to tell him so later. She walked without ceremony, not without dignity, with complete dignity, the kind that doesn't need theater. She walked the way she had walked across the back of my hall every evening for a year, in that particular unhurried way, and she walked to the center of the hall and stopped. The wolves were there, not the formal wolf guard, not the arranged alpha wolves of the ceremonial arrangement. The night wolves, the ones from the outer courtyard, the ones she had been leaving water for all winter, had come through the courtyard gate and arranged themselves along the edges of the hall with the serene confidence of animals who had been told they were not allowed somewhere and had decided to be somewhere anyway. There were 11 of them. Haveth's assistant was trying to count them and had lost count twice. No one moved them. My wolf had made its position clear. Haveth read the bloodline documentation. He read the account of the mark, witnessed by himself and by 17 members of the court who had been in the hall 3 nights ago. He read the lineage of the Varath Compact and the record of the Lady Alara and the daughter who had not been found. He read clearly and without hurry, the way he did everything, and the hall was entirely silent the entire time. "Does any member of this council or any attending lord challenge the bloodline record?" Renwick said, when Haveth had finished. No one did. There was a silence of the kind that contains its own answer. "Does any member challenge the evidence of the mark and the wolf bond, witnessed before this court?" No one did. "Then let the record show," Renwick said, "that the bond is acknowledged, the bloodline is confirmed, and the Lady Saren of the Varath line stands before this court as the fated mate of Calder Voss, Alpha King of Thavorn." I crossed the hall to her. My wolf was not running now. My wolf was walking with the steady, settled confidence of a creature in its own territory, which is the most absolute thing a wolf can be. I reached her and I looked at her, and she looked at me with her gray riverstone eyes, entirely present, the ink still on her third finger, the blue and silver on her shoulders. "I am going to put my cloak around you," I said quietly. "In this hall before these people, do you understand what that means?" "I have been reading the historical documents," she said. "I understand what it means." And, and she said, I told you 3 nights ago that I was not unwilling. I have had 3 days to consider it more carefully, and I find that my position has not changed. She paused. I would also like to note, for the record, that I intend to continue keeping water bowls in the moon garden for the night wolves. I assumed this would not be a difficulty. It is not a difficulty, I said. Good, she said. Then yes, put your cloak around me. I took the outer cloak from my shoulders and settled it around hers, the formal gesture, the one that in the history of Thavorn has always meant what it means, the one that has no ambiguity and no footnote. You are mine, and I am yours, and this hall witnesses it. The wolves along the edges of the hall stood up. All 11 of them in unison, without any apparent signal, and they bowed, not with the full prostration of a formal submission, but with the particular dip of the head that means recognition, the gesture that says we know what this is, and we have known it longer than you have. The council stood, the pack lord stood, Haveth stood, which took him some time, and his assistant stood beside him. Saren looked out at the hall. I watched her face as she saw it, the full formal court of Thavorn standing, the wolves in their row along the walls, the obsidian pillars candlelit, the moon panels letting in the mid-morning gray. I watched her see it with the same honest, clear attention she gave everything, not overwhelmed, not triumphant, simply present, taking it in, filing it away to think about later. She looked back at me. I poured wine in this hall for a year, she said, quietly enough that only I could hear it. I know, I said. No one learned my name. I know that too, I said. I was one of them. She looked at me for a long moment. You know it now. I know it now, I said. I intend to make up the deficit. Something moved in her eyes, the decision arriving, the door opening, and she smiled. A full one this time, not the precursor but the thing itself. Unhurried, genuine, a little wry around the edges because she was that kind of person, and she was always going to be that kind of person. Ink on her fingers and wolves at her feet, and a year of being invisible behind her, and none of it had changed what she was. My wolf came home in the truest sense in that moment. Not when the mark appeared, not when the hall stood. In that moment, in the smile of a woman who had been standing still for a year while everyone around her moved, and who had simply, honestly decided that this was worth opening the door for. I had been precise for 9 years. I had trusted order and procedure and evidence, and they had served me well and told me almost nothing that mattered. 3 days in a moon garden with a woman who noticed cracked pillars and counted wolves and asked Haveth questions that made him blink with pleasure had told me more than 9 years of formal procedure. Come, I said, and offered her my arm. She took it. We walked back down the center of the hall together, past the standing council and the standing lords and the 11 wolves who stood with us, and the side passage door, the one she had used for a year with a wine carafe, the door she had been retreating through when my wolf had finally said enough, stood open at the far end, and beyond it was the inner courtyard and the moon garden and the water bowls and the long, ordinary work of a life. The great hall of Thavorn had been many things in 9 years of my reign. In that moment, with her hand on my arm and the wolves walking beside us and Haveth's pen already scratching at his document behind us, it was something it had not been before. It was a place she belonged in, which meant, for the first time since I had sat in it as a newly crowned king and decided to make it orderly and efficient and correct, it was a place I did.